I heard the scream before I found the door, thin as a wire and cutting the dark like it knew my name. I whispered, "This place remembers me," and the hallway replied with a soft metallic sigh. The Greybridge key in my palm felt warmer than skin. Dust spun in my phone's flashlight, each mote a startled eye. I pressed my ear to room 304, and a breath pressed back. My heartbeat stumbled, then kept time with a slow rasp inside the wall. I said, "If you're hurt, answer me," and a fingernail scraped the other side. The lock turned without my hand. A smell of wet iron slid out. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, like something clawed its way through a century. The bed was made, but the sheet bore 5 thin shadows. My forearm prickled, heat threading the veins. I lifted my sleeve and watched red lines rise, neat and deliberate. "Stop," I said, and the lines answered with a final sting. The scream returned, now inside the vent, fleeing deeper. I stepped after it, and the door drifted shut, almost kind. The rain chased me down the stairs and out into the street like it wanted me gone. I walked fast, then ran when the wind carried that thin scream across puddles. My car unlocked without me touching the fob. I said, "Not tonight," and strapped in as if a belt could keep the dark out. The marks under my sleeve pulsed in careful rhythm, a counting I could not stop hearing. The rear view held the hotel door, ajar, as if waiting for me to blink. I blinked, and it was closed. I drove 3 red lights and forgot them as soon as my tires left the paint. Every storefront wore a sheet of rain. Every signal swam. I kept my breath low so nothing would fog. At a corner, the engine coughed, then settled like it had been listening. I said, "You don't get to ride with me," and turned the radio up to drown the vents. I reached my apartment and locked the door twice, then once more because the deadbolt sounded too light. I wiped rain from my face and felt grit that wasn't from the street. My sleeve stuck to my arm where the lines burned, precise and patient. The hallway outside held its breath. In the bathroom mirror, I watched my mouth test a smile that did not belong to me. I said, "You're fine," and the light flickered as if correcting me. The key I had pocketed clinked against porcelain, then slid toward the drain on its own. I caught it and felt warmth again, but deeper, as if the metal had a pulse. The vent above the shower whispered a hair-thin draft that smelled of the hotel, damp and old. The phone buzzed with a voicemail I never recorded. My own voice threaded through static, pleading from somewhere hollow. I pressed play and heard, "Leave the door open," followed by 5 soft drags. My ribs drew tight as rope. I said, "No doors," and turned every lock I owned. The apartment's hum changed, like old machinery starting behind drywall. I placed the key in a ceramic bowl and stepped back. The bowl chimed once, then again, each strike softer than the last. The vents breathed in time with the chimes, shallow and greedy. I whispered, "Who taught you my home?" The ceiling creaked like a step taken in a careful shoe. I called Michael and let it ring long enough to feel less alone. When voicemail answered, I said, "Tell me this is nothing," and hung up before the promise could fail. The lines on my arm warmed, not angry, just insistent. I wrapped a dish towel around the wrist like a child's bandage, and sat on the floor with my back to the door. The bowl on the table quivered and settled. The radio in the kitchen woke itself on a whisper of static, then went quiet like it had been shushed. I breathed with the refrigerator's motor until we both steadied. I said, "If you want me, speak," and the silence smiled. The morning light broke thin across my blinds, but sleep had not found me. I sat at the kitchen table with untouched coffee, watching steam coil and vanish before it reached my face. My arm throbbed under the towel I had tied hours ago. The lines beneath felt deeper, as though carved not on skin but in bone. I whispered, "You don't get to own me," though the silence seemed unimpressed. The key lay in the bowl still, gleaming faintly like it remembered flame. I picked up my phone and stared at Michael's number, thumb hovering. Fear of being dismissed weighed heavier than the fear itself. I needed him, yet I dreaded his laugh, his calm insistence that everything had a rational name. Outside, a truck passed, spraying water across the curb, but the sound bent, becoming another echo of that scream. I pressed call, because solitude was louder. Michael answered on the third ring, voice rough from sleep. He said, "You sound wrecked. What happened?" I told him about the marks, the hotel, the door that opened itself. He laughed once, short, not unkind, but sharp enough to sting. "Stress streams leave scars too," he said. I clenched my hand, nails biting skin, and replied, "Dreams don't follow you home." Silence followed, long and thoughtful. Then he said, "I'll come over, but we're calling someone. You need answers, not shadows." I agreed because arguing meant losing him. The marks pulsed, mocking the word rational. I stared at the bowl where the key still rested, almost expectant. "Hurry," I whispered, though not only to him. When Michael arrived, his jacket was rain-speckled, though the sky outside had cleared. He hugged me quick, eyes narrowing at the way I pulled my sleeve down. "Show me," he demanded softly. I lifted the towel, revealing the lines etched like deliberate calligraphy. His jaw tightened, then he forced a smile. "Could be dermatographia, could be nerves," he said, but his eyes betrayed doubt. I said, "It wrote itself while I stood in that room." He looked at the bowl where the key gleamed and asked, "Why keep it?" I answered, "Because it won't leave." The air between us chilled as though it too understood. Michael paced the living room, running a hand through his hair, muttering about dermatologists and sleep disorders. I watched his movements, quick and restless, and felt the room shrinking with each step he took. He said, "Fear feeds fear. Don't give this shape." I whispered, "It already has." He stopped, staring at me like I had broken a rule we didn't speak. The radiator hissed, then sighed, in rhythm with the lines burning on my arm. I pulled the sleeve down and said, "Stay tonight." He frowned but finally nodded. Agreement felt like a brittle shield. As dusk bled into night, we sat with the television on mute, the screen glowing shapes without sound. Michael scribbled notes on a pad, trying to chart when the marks appeared. I stared at the bowl where the key shimmered faintly, as if catching a light not present. He asked, "When did the first scar start?" I said, "The moment the door opened itself." He tapped the pen, unsatisfied with the answer, and kept writing. The silence thickened until even the static hum of the set sounded like whispering. I leaned forward and said, "It wants me to remember." Michael did not look up. The night pressed down like a lid, heavy and airless, and the apartment felt smaller with every tick of the clock. Michael sat on the couch, writing in his notebook, while I paced the length of the rug. Each step raised a creak that seemed too sharp, too rehearsed, like the floorboards were repeating the same warning. I stopped when the radiator hissed, then exhaled in a perfect copy of my breath. Michael looked up, frowning. He asked, "You hear that?" I nodded, pressing a hand to my arm as the lines burned again. They weren't random now. They curved, forming a pattern I couldn't name. I whispered, "It's trying to speak." Michael shook his head, muttering about psychosomatic tricks, but his pen snapped in his hand. The sound echoed louder than it should, ricocheting into the walls like a crack of bone. The silence that followed the snap was not empty. It had weight, a pressing presence that made the walls bow inward. I whispered, "It heard us," though I did not know why I believed it. Michael rubbed his temple, jaw set tight, and said, "No, we're hearing the building settle." But the ceiling creaked directly above, deliberate, step after step. The air thickened with the smell of rust and damp wallpaper, the scent of the hotel invading my home. I clutched my arm, feeling the marks deepen, carving their own will into my skin. "It followed me," I said, and Michael looked up at the ceiling, his eyes betraying that flicker of doubt he tried to hide. The television turned itself on, static filling the screen in jagged light. Michael jumped to his feet, cursing under his breath. The static hiss wasn't random. It pulsed in 5-beat intervals, mimicking the claw marks on my arm. I stepped closer, the glow painting my face in fractured white and black. From the hiss a whisper formed, my own voice repeating, "Don't shut the door." I staggered back, pressing against the wall. Michael grabbed the remote, pressing buttons, but nothing changed. He slammed the remote on the table, shouting, "It's interference, nothing else," but his voice shook as much as mine. The phone rang, sharp and shrill, cutting through the static. Michael lunged for it, muttering about telemarketers, but froze when he saw the caller ID'd. My number. I stepped forward, heart seizing, and whispered, "Don't." He answered anyway, holding the phone between us. My own voice came through, distorted, begging, "Let me out." A scraping sound followed, dragging metal against stone, until Michael dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the voice still pleading from the speaker. I pressed my hands over my ears, shouting, "Stop." But the voice only grew louder, matching my tone perfectly, like an echo that belonged to me but not to me. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging us into a darkness broken only by the glow of the television static. I reached for Michael, my fingers brushing his sleeve, grounding myself in that single human contact. The static shifted, resolving into an image. The hallway of the Greybridge Hotel. Room 304's doors stood ajar, shadows moving behind it. My arm burned, the lines flaring red like fresh wounds. I whispered, "It wants me back." Michael gripped my shoulder tightly and said, "Then we don't go." But the static image pulsed, the door on the screen opening wider. The sound of the hotel's air system filled the room, heavy and damp, as though the vent above us had just connected both places. The following day, Michael insisted we see someone who could explain the impossible without superstition. His insistence carried the tone of a lifeline, though his eyes still betrayed the doubt he fought to keep. We found ourselves in a sterile office lined with framed certificates, where Dr. Ethan Cole listened without interrupting. His gaze was sharp, the kind that dissected rather than comforted. I described the marks, the voice, the static in the hotel's shadow. He scribbled notes and finally said, "Hallucination under stress is common." I lifted my sleeve, showing the welts raw and new. Michael's jaw clenched, waiting for validation. Dr. Cole leaned closer, eyes narrowing, but only said, "The body obeys the mind. This is no haunting, only misfired nerves." His certainty struck like a wall, but I felt the lines deepen under his stare, blooming as if to prove him wrong. Dr. Cole suggested a controlled test, a way to measure what he called psychosomatic triggers. He handed me a clipboard, asking me to track when the marks appeared. His calmness pressed against the dread curling in my chest. I whispered, "It doesn't wait for permission." Michael touched my shoulder, urging me to play along. As I set the clipboard on my lap, the marks flared, rising with deliberate symmetry. Dr. Cole leaned forward, brows knit, though his voice stayed level. "You see what you expect," he said, but his pen trembled slightly in his hand. The radiator in the corner exhaled a hiss, carrying with it the smell of the hotel's damp wallpaper. I caught his eyes flick upward for just a moment, betraying the first crack in his certainty. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied, drawing all three of our gazes upward. Dr. Cole cleared his throat, forcing composure, and said, "Electrical interference is normal in older buildings." But his office was pristine, modern, without a loose wire in sight. The clipboard slipped from my lap, clattering to the floor, yet I hadn't moved. Michael bent to retrieve it and froze, whispering, "It's hot." The metal clip left a faint burn on his fingertips. Dr. Cole pursed his lips, refusing the evidence, and said, "The mind burns hotter than flame when it convinces itself." I stared at him, voice breaking as I whispered, "Then whose mind is it?" The silence after that question lasted too long, the office breathing like something alive. Dr. Cole insisted we remain in the office while he performed what he called a simple observation exercise. He asked me to close my eyes and describe what I felt, reminding me, "Nothing can harm you in this room." His words rang false, even as they left his lips. I obeyed, drawing breath, and immediately the marks on my arms seared like fresh carvings. I gasped, whispering, It's writing. Michael reached for me, panic lacing his voice as he demanded Cole open his eyes to the truth. Cole's calm cracked. His chair scraped back as he stood, watching as the welts twisted into symbols. His hand trembled near his chin, not writing now, only staring. The office door rattled suddenly, as if someone pushed from the hallway, though no shadow appeared beneath it. The sound silenced us all, every breath caught. Dr. Cole finally spoke, voice brittle. "We should end here," Michael snapped. "End? You saw it," but Cole shook his head, muttering about shared delusion. Yet his hand darted to his keys, knuckles pale. I stood, sleeves still rolled, the marks glowing faintly in the sterile light. "It doesn't care if you believe," I whispered. The door rattled again, harder this time, and every certificate on the wall tilted, as if struck by unseen hands. Cole froze, lips pressed thin, unable to deny what his eyes could not reason away. The night drove us to the archives, an old stone building whose lamps buzzed faintly as if afraid of their own glow. Michael muttered that this was absurd, but Mara Quinn met us at the door with a lantern and a gaze too calm. She said, "You brought it with you." Her voice carried knowledge I had not offered. Inside, dust swirled through shafts of lamplight like slow rivers. Shelves leaned under the weight of forgotten names, brittle paper, and secrets sealed by time. Mara unrolled a ledger, fingers tracing columns of missing guests from Greybridge. My breath caught when I saw patterns of 5 marks scrawled beside each name. She whispered, "They were chosen, not lost." Michael shook his head, whispering, "Coincidence," but his voice trembled with disbelief. I touched the ledger, and the lines on my arm burned in perfect unison with the ink. Mara spread faded photographs across the table, each one showing a guest who vanished decades apart. Their faces blurred at the edges, as if the paper could not hold them fully. She pointed to a young woman, Ava Reed, and whispered. She resisted, and the marks consumed her. I felt my chest tighten, the name scratching inside my memory. Michael demanded, "Why haven't we heard about this?" Mara smiled faintly, saying, "Because the building feeds on silence. Records survive only when someone keeps them hidden." I leaned closer, studying Ava's eyes, which seemed to stare directly into mine despite the fading ink. The welts on my arm pulsed, their rhythm matching the beat of a heart I did not want to know. Mara led us deeper into the archive, past locked cabinets that rattled softly, though no one touched them. She carried a file bound in twine, her hands steady but her eyes cautious. She said, "Greybridge was built as a vessel, not a refuge." Her words landed like stones, heavy and undeniable. Michael scoffed, insisting, "Buildings don't choose people." Mara turned, gaze sharp, and replied, "Then, why does it write on her skin?" I clutched my sleeve, unable to argue. She untied the file, revealing sketches of symbols that matched the scars burning across my arm. I whispered, "It's not random," and Mara nodded once, satisfied. The lamps flickered, shadows curling across the pages like fingers trying to steal them back. She set the file down and whispered, "Every 5 years, the hotel claims another, and their name is marked in silence. The ledger is not finished." Michael shook his head, muttering that curses were fairy tales. Mara touched the scars on my arm lightly, and I flinched. She said, "It chose you because you carried its key, whether knowingly or not." My stomach dropped, remembering the key I tried to discard, the way it always returned. I whispered, "I never asked for this." Mara's gaze softened, though her words did not. None of them did. The air thickened with a low hum, as if the walls themselves had heard. Papers shifted on the table, though no hand touched them, curling at the edges like they feared the truth. Mara pulled a final sheet from the file, a map of the hotel marked with circles around vents and stairwells. "It moves through air," she whispered. "Always near but never seen." Michael leaned closer, still clinging to logic, saying, "This proves nothing." Yet his voice wavered, and his knuckles whitened on the table edge. I stared at the map, the circles forming a path that led always to room 304. My scars burned so hot, I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Mara leaned close, her whisper colder now. If you go back, it will not ask. It will take. I closed my eyes, but the image of the door already waited, ajar in the dark behind my lids. The storm broke as we returned to Greybridge, rain striking the pavement like nails. Michael cursed under his breath, but I felt the pull in my chest like a leash drawing me home. Mara followed in silence, lantern glowing beneath her cloak. The hotel loomed taller than before, windows blank like shut eyes. My scars burned so hot, I thought they might split me open. I whispered, "It's waiting," Michael said. "Then we face it," though his voice faltered. Mara touched the door and whispered words I didn't understand. The hinges groaned, opening without force, the darkness inside, thick and wet. For a moment I smelled Ava's perfume, faint and sweet, curling through the rot. The door did not invite us, it demanded. Inside, the lobby was darker than memory, its chandelier swaying, though no wind touched it. Water pooled on the cracked tiles, reflecting broken furniture like drowned bodies. Mara whispered, "Every corner listens here." My arm pulsed, guiding me toward the staircase where shadows clustered thick. Michael muttered about structural decay, but his eyes darted too quickly, refusing to rest on the vent grills. A whisper brushed past us, a voice layered over itself 5 tones at once, calling my name. I clutched the railing, breath shaking. "It knows I came back," I whispered. Mara answered, "It never let you leave." We climbed the stairs, each step groaning under our weight like bones snapping. At the landing, the wallpaper peeled in strips, exposing symbols etched into the plaster, the same shapes carved into my arm. I pressed a hand to them and felt heat bleed through. Michael pulled me back, voice cracking, "Don't touch it." But I couldn't stop. It felt like the walls pulsed with my heartbeat. Mara hissed, "It's binding you." The air thickened until every breath tasted of rust and old smoke. A door at the end of the corridor swung open slowly, revealing room 304, its frame yawning wider than it should. My scars lit like fire under the dim light, guiding me forward. Inside room 304, the bed was stripped bare, springs rusted and exposed like ribs. The air buzzed with electricity, every surface vibrating faintly. Michael muttered, "It's collapsing in on itself." Mara placed the lantern at the foot of the bed, whispering a prayer that carried weight even in its fragments. I felt the scars move, twisting across my skin into a pattern that mirrored the floorboards. I fell to my knees, gasping, as the boards bulged upward, forming a shape like a body pressing from below. A voice bled through the vent. Ava's voice, crying, "Don't let it finish." Michael grabbed me, shouting my name, but the room bent, pulling us toward the bed like gravity had shifted. The floor split with a deafening crack, and from beneath rose air thick with rot and fire. Shadows spilled upward, clawing along the walls, pulling at the lantern's glow. Ava's voice screamed again, her cry torn between plea and warning. My arm blazed with pain as the marks flared, forming a final symbol that glowed like molten iron. Mara shouted, "Break the pattern or it takes you." Michael pulled at my sleeve, eyes wild, but I pressed my hand against the boards where the light converged. The pain split me open inside and out, but the symbols shattered, flaring and then collapsing into ash. The room went silent, except for our ragged breaths, but the vent whispered still, promising the ritual was not ended, only stalled. The silence after the collapse was worse than the noise. Mara's lantern flickered weakly, throwing shadows across the broken boards. Michael clung to me, shaking though he tried to hide it. My scars glowed faintly like embers cooling in ash. I whispered, "It isn't finished." Mara knelt, eyes sharp in the dim light, and answered, "It never is. You severed one thread, not the weave." The smell of smoke lingered, though nothing burned. I felt the air moving through the vent, slow and deliberate, carrying with it the echo of the hotel's hunger. My chest tightened as I realized I had not escaped, I had only delayed its claim. We stumbled from the hotel into the storm's dying breath, the rain easing into a mist that clung to our skin. Michael muttered, "We should burn it down," but his voice lacked conviction. Mara shook her head, whispering, "Fire won't kill what was built to endure." I stared at the looming facade, its windows now glowing faintly from within, though no light source burned. My arm throbbed under my sleeve, the marks still alive, reminding me that nothing had truly ended. "It carries me," I whispered, the truth finally sinking in. The hotel stood silent, but I felt its gaze follow us into the night. Back in my apartment, the silence was thick with waiting. Michael dozed fitfully on the couch, pen still in his hand, notebook on his chest. Mara sat near the window, lantern unlit, eyes distant as though she listened for something only she could hear. I traced the scars on my arm, feeling them itch with each breath. They no longer looked random. They formed a map, twisting lines converging toward a single shape. I whispered to myself, "It marked the path." My reflection in the window wavered, not matching the movement of my body. I turned away, unable to watch as it smiled when I did not. Mara finally spoke, voice low but certain. "The hotel is not bound to walls. It is bound to blood." Her eyes fixed on me, unblinking, and I felt the weight of her meaning. Michael stirred, groaning, "We can fight it." She shook her head. "You don't fight what is inside." My chest tightened, the marks pulsing with warmth like veins carrying something not mine. I whispered, "Then what happens now?" Mara's silence was the answer, heavier than words. The vent above the door exhaled faintly, carrying with it the smell of rust, damp, and the faint trace of Ava's perfume. That night, I lay awake, listening to the hum of my apartment. The refrigerator, the pipes, the city outside, all blended with the low breath from the vents. I stared at the ceiling until the glow from my scars lit the room faintly. My phone buzzed once, screen lighting without a call. Across it an image appeared. The hallway of Greybridge, the door to room 304 open wide. I whispered, "Not again." But the scars burned hotter, pulsing in rhythm with the screen's light. The image shimmered, and 5 slow scratches dragged themselves across the glass. I dropped the phone, but the sound of claws on metal lingered long after the screen went black.